Alright, I think we are live. We're doing it live. I got a notification.
Seems
It's a
like it.
go. It's a go.
Seems like it. Or,
Yeah, it
trying
doesn't.
to see if it's on YouTube here.
That's fine. No drop frames. The internet connection seems to be good. That's good.
That is
Um,
good.
hey Eric.
Yeah.
So Greg currently isn't here right now, but we are joined by a special guest who goes by the name of Wardsylvania on Instagram. Thanks for being here tonight and chatting with us.
Thanks for having me. Long
Yeah,
time on
no.
the podcast. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you here. Um, would you like to go by your screen name or by your name? Like when we ultimately start the podcast, do you have a preference?
I'm James.
Okay. Yeah, well, awesome.
Hey James. Well, many of you, if you are like into the Inquisitor 28 community and everything, you may be familiar with some of James' work on Instagram. Again, he goes by the tag of Wardsylvania, and he's done a lot of really cool Inc 28 conversions and stuff over the years, and has participated and helped run two events at Adepticon. One of which just recently concluded with this year's Adepticon, and in a little while we're gonna ask him all sorts of questions about said event on our podcast. So we're excited to ask you all that stuff and kind of learn some more about it. Because I'm a little sad that we weren't able to find time to make some models to actually send to said event. But I guess,
Yeah, missed opportunities.
yeah, it gets hard to make models for all the different events and stuff that are happening. And
Nah, it's true. It's true.
In general, you guys are fairly prolific with that, though. It seems like most of the Inc. 28 events I see coverage for, there's at least one Wire Brothers model in there.
yeah, so I mean, we try to make something and send them, but like as it is, like everything that we work on, a lot of it is just stuff that like I convert and paint, and Eric, you help a little with it too. Um, so like
Yeah,
it's
all
hard
the
to
time
get them
consuming.
in there.
I'm sure you know from like just running these Adepticon events and such. There's a lot of stuff to do, even if you're just um, making a model or two, let alone actually running the event.
No doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems Johnny Lashley, I think, he seems to be listening to us on Twitch here. That's good. I think um, he participated in the Carrion Pass thing, right?
He
Yeah, he
did. Yeah.
certainly did. Like
That awesome like little flyer thing and the Van Sar skull helmet
the Doom
gloss.
Marine. That's what I
Yeah,
think of
the
him
Doom
as.
Marine.
Really cool.
Really, yeah.
Johnny's
Which
great to collaborate with. We'll get on voice chat, every so often. He's like,
oh, that's good. That's exciting.
hey, I got this idea, and the thing would do this, and we'll cook up some rules. And so he ends up with this like a whole sheet of custom rules for the different models he's converted up, and that's what
That's
That's
it's
awesome.
great.
so.
Yeah, I think that's part of the fun, particularly with some of this with like Inc 28 and some of that. Like you do have a lot of freedom to like essentially put in as much effort as you want in like the conversions, in the rules themselves, the background, all of that. So I think you can have a lot of fun just kind of experimenting around with different ideas in on like many different levels.
Absolutely.
Hmm
That's,
hmm
to me, one of the main draws of this permutation of the hobby is
Mm-hmm.
the bespoke models, unique settings, and just customizing the rules to be whatever seems like it'll work best for that particular scenario.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of something that I always liked about like the Warhammer 40,000 universe. As it's typically pitched, they like talk about how there is just a really vast universe and all sorts of stuff's going on. So I think it really sort of allows you to explore all sorts of things, and you, at least in my mind, you don't necessarily really have to feel limited by that, or like you don't necessarily have to be forced into some imagery or anything like that. So I think it really allows for a lot of ideas and creativity.
Well, as they're so fond of saying, it's your hobby, right? So you can take
Yeah.
what works and you can throw out what doesn't, and yeah, the possibilities are endless.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if I had, like, my brothers and I, when we started in the hobby, like, I guess we sort of loosely tried to play Warhammer 40,000 and, like, Gorka Morka and stuff like that. And I feel if, like, that is all we had done and that's all we would have continued to do, I don't think we would really still be in the hobby, and certainly not as invested in it as, say, we are now. And then I guess sort of the advent of all the different social media and stuff, like it's easier than ever to get in contact with other like-minded individuals. Because I know, like,
That's true.
all of the hobby shops and stuff that we happen to go to, yeah, pretty much all of them, like, all of the people who were there, I feel they were more, or at least the ones I met, were more into just playing standard edition, like Warhammer 40,000 or anything. So, like, it can be hard to find other people who have, like, a similar idea or mentality of how to, like, play the game and go about things. And particularly if you're not really out there looking for people or trying to, say, start your own movement in your own local store, it can be pretty hard.
But we're not the type of hobbyists that are generally hanging out in the local game store anyway, because we spend so
No.
much time, building and converting models, right? And I don't even go to the store unless I'm buying something or unless I've got, people that I've planned, to do a
Yeah.
game with, right?
Yeah.
So that definitely makes it sort of harder to discover, right? And harder to find those like-minded players.
That's certainly true. And I know for a few years I was out in San Diego for work, and there was a local games workshop that was maybe like 20 minutes away from where I lived, and like I would go there maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, and it was typically just to go and show the person who worked there like whatever model I was converting or whatnot, and like maybe if there was something I wanted to buy to further a conversion. And that was like why I'd go there, and like everyone else there like was largely just like, oh, I'm building my Iron Warriors army. I have like 18,000 points worth of it, and like I just got my Warhound Titan. And then like if say I brought a model, like maybe I know I spent like several months converting like a Death Guard Space Marine around the time of, what was it called, Dark Imperium or whatever. And I remember just bringing the model, and then the store owner was really excited about it, and he would sometimes go and take it around and show it to other people, and like they barely even glanced at it. It was to the point where like if a lot of people even looked at it, I don't even think they would have had even fathom like how much effort went into that one model. But
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
feel
in the
that's
end,
just like
it's fine.
different.
I mean,
It's a different hobby, and like even like something like Golden Demon, all those painting competitions. You want those things judged by people who are actually painters and are skilled with it. And like if
yeah,
you're having a conversation about painting with like someone who does kind of competitively paint, like people are excited about it and like, oh, how did you achieve this? And there's lots to talk about. But if you're not interested in converting or not interested in those things, like there's just that disconnect. And I
Well,
feel Games Workshop has at least started to they've always been talking about like, oh, you can do what you want and narrative or competitive and such, but I feel more than ever they're finally starting to put out like resources and stuff to support those things, which is nice.
Listening to people who do play the game exclusively competitively was kind of, eye-opening to me, because it's a totally opposite approach to the hobby, right? People who don't even like painting, they get their models painted by somebody else. And
3-color minimum.
It's entirely a competitive exercise, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's an equally valid way to enjoy the hobby. It's just a totally the mindset what people get satisfaction out of is just the total opposite of why I'm there.
Johnny actually said something a little while ago here that the rules season the story.
If they're done right, yeah.
Yeah, I feel that's maybe what will be something that could be a little bit interesting to talk to you kind of about the Carrion Pass event. Like, I think seems to have kind of struck a nice balance of kind of introducing some rules and stuff to sort of shape the mission or the scenario that you were playing. Would have had like a really strong theme, and that it seems like it was a good opportunity to like get people sort of on board with what sort of things they could create such that they would be able to sort of race alongside this war rig thing. And I think that and like the clever rules that you sort of designed to fit with that, I think almost certainly had to help people come up with like crazy ideas and things they want to do, and just sort of help further the narrative and make the game go more smoothly when actually playing it.
There were definitely aspects of that were both a success and a failure, so we can probably touch on both of those, because the failure cases are probably where the best learnings come from, as is usually the case.
Yeah.
One of the challenges with these events that use a bespoke rule set, that you'll use for one or two events and probably never use again, is there isn't a lot of opportunity to do balancing or
that's true. And not everyone necessarily comes knowing those rules.
Yeah, because you're layering them on top of like necromantic.
Yeah, and then like everyone everyone, if you've been playing the game for any length of time, like you don't really remember what's 3rd edition to 6th edition to the current 8th edition. Like, I know when my brothers and I played in like the Pilgrim sort of event, like it was clear no one there really remembered the rules for 40K. It was like some mixture of like 3rd edition, 7th edition, Necromunda, like this weird mix of like switching up things like kind of on the fly. And I mean, that's fine. Like, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, I feel if anything,
we weren't playing anything competitive. Like it just didn't matter. It was just to sort of stay within the mindset and the theme, and then that's fine. That's good enough. Yeah. So it's just such a different way to play.
Yeah, the dice were just there to sort of vaguely inform how well or how poorly certain actions went down.
That's the challenge, is to make the rules, as Johnny's saying, season the story without getting in the way, and that's there's a fine balance to strike there. And I definitely end up with way more rules, than I had planned at the beginning. So I'm always worried that the rules are too complex, and they sort of have the risk of getting in the way. I don't feel like that was the result with the Carrion Pass project, but when I got the rules written and I looked at it and I'm like, I've got over a dozen pages of custom rules on top of Necromunda. I'm like, oh man, have I gone about this wrong?
Yeah.
And I feel also like if like the people you're playing with are really on board with it and are really gung-ho about it, like I feel you could pretty much make anything work, at least to some degree. And it also just depends on like how much people in general are playing. Like, I mean, I guess when we took part in the Pilgrim event, like, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. Like, I think that was the first time I really actively played anything for maybe like 2 years. So, I mean, it was bad.
Well, the nature of these events is that, you know, they're going to attract people that are in that situation where they spend all or nearly all of their time building and converting and maybe writing fiction, and the actual
Yeah.
playing of the game is sort of a secondary activity.
Yeah.
I certainly
Yeah, we
spend
could do that. Yeah, let's do that. Like,
you guys do that. I spend 90+% of my time, you know, hobbying and not gaming. You know, even though I enjoy all of those elements of the hobby. Uh, so yeah, that's definitely a you know, potential issue, but um, for Carrion Pass in particular, that didn't really seem to be a problem. Um, you know, the games seemed to flow pretty well, and we spent very little time looking up rules, despite the complexity of the rules system. So I think in that regard, it was a success.
had you played Necromunda before, like before the newest incarnation of it?
So it's interesting. I missed. So I got into Warhammer 40,000 during the second edition era, but the sort of specialist games, you know, at that time in my life just didn't appeal to me. So I never got into Gorka Morka or original Necromunda or you know, like Epic or any of those. Um, you know, and now you know, it's the Necromunda, you know, and well, specifically Necromunda that really seems to hit the sweet spot for me in terms of like the rule set. But you know, I missed it the first go around, so I only really know it by reputation and you know, kind
And
of
that's sort of true for us as well.
Yeah,
we started during the second edition as well, and I mean, I think we sort of played like a bastardized version of second edition, where we sort of read the rules, sort of didn't, and we were pretty young, so we were terrible at it. And then eventually, maybe for Christmas the one year, we got Gorka Morka, and I think that was the first of GW's games that we really spent some time and made sure we were actually playing it mostly correctly.
Yeah, I remember just sitting reading the rule book and like, oh, that's how weapon skill works. Like, it's like, oh, you just subtract the number from 7 and that's what you hit. Like, it's like, wow, this is actually pretty easy. And then that was basically the system like practically all their games use.
Yeah,
I
for
guess
a long
now it's a
time.
little different, but it's simplified more. But
Yeah. Would
funny
be
you
fun
mentioned
to play
Gorka
Gorka Morka again.
because as we were as I was describing the game mechanics I had in mind, I was kind of posting those to the Facebook group, and then somebody commented, "Hey, this is just like a scenario from Gorka Morka that was tons of fun." And since I had never played Gorka
Oh,
Morka or
that's
read the
cool.
rule book, I had no idea. But I'm like, you know, I know this game by reputation, and if people are relating this to a Gorka Morka scenario they loved, I'm probably on the right track.
Yeah, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. Yeah, no, that's cool.
yeah, Gorka Morka was fun. But then it was like that was the only skirmish game that we actually played to any degree. Like, it didn't play Gorka Morka, or I mean, didn't play Necromunda, didn't play Mordheim. I guess those were their main skirmish games.
Yeah, I remember when they all came out, and it's like, we didn't really have any money then, and so we didn't really play any of that.
Yeah.
So what's the thought, Eric? Do we think maybe we want to soon just record the podcast? I don't know. Greg seems like he's still missing in action.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably. Yeah, I mean, we could probably just record. How does that sound to you, James?
Let's go for it.
All right. So, do people have Audacity up?
I certainly do.
Ditto.
All right, so yeah, we're gonna try to record this.
Actually, maybe we should let's send Greg a message saying that we're gonna start the thing and tell him he can join if he wants.
Yeah, we can do that. But then we can.
Well, yeah, we should.
It doesn't matter if he does come in part way through it. Like, we can always just get the audio from the like YouTube recording or something. So it's not really the end of the world.
All right.
It's not really the end of the world.
I'll send Greg a message.
But so I guess kind of getting back to that Necromunda, have you played just the new version of Necromunda, or was it just like, oh, this would be a good opportunity to like start creating some like Inc. 28 events or something, or do you have a group that you played that new version with just kind of standard rules as written?
So I think my first Necromunda was at Adepticon the previous year, where I signed up for some of the the Necromunda events they were running. So that was kind of my first exposure. And then when I got back to the U.S., I couldn't find people to game with, so I started a Facebook group for Necromunda in my hometown. And over a course of months, that accumulated enough people. And eventually somebody was like, hey, I'm going to run a campaign. So we actually now have a fairly active Necromunda campaign going on locally, run by somebody else, which has been great. So I got to participate not in the most recent campaign they did, because that was while I was getting ready for Adepticon, but the one before that. And that was tons of fun. Getting to see the gang progress and develop skills.
Yeah, that's good. What gang are you playing? Was it your Van Sar like converted sort of warband?
Yeah, that's the so at Adepticon I'd used Escher, and then in the Necromunda campaign here last year I was using the Van Sar.
Okay.
Which are a lot of fun, but if the terrain's not set up correctly, they're a bit OP, because you really need some dense terrain to make sure
that's
that
what I kind of heard.
Shoot everybody to pieces. So the guy that's running it is quite good at what he's doing, and he's incorporated Zone Mortalis into the most recent campaign to make sure that you're forced to make the gang a bit more balanced. It's not just all guns.
Okay.
And I think that helps curtail, the strength of the Van Sar.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so I'm ready.
Likewise.
All right. So, let's see here. All right, yeah, so we'll just do the record thing. I'll make kind of the general introductions, and I'll do some short introduction for you, James, and then, yeah, you can say hi.
So I guess we can just talk about this briefly as well. In terms of like how we're going to go about this, do we want to like first talk a little bit about like Blanchitsu, Inc. 28, all that, kind of touch on that, then move into like kind of how to get involved, or I mean some of that, yeah, I mean I don't know, I think most of the people who are listening to the podcast know some of that, but it probably wouldn't hurt to at least touch on it.
We can talk about some of it a little bit, because I think it would be relevant.
Johnny, yeah, like I've played like 2 games of Necromunda 2, or they weren't even real Necromunda. They were like an Inc. 28 Necromunda, so technically, yeah. So Pilgrim, Curse of the Alabaster. I guess maybe I guess 2. I played 2.
Not many.
Yeah, so cool.
It would be good to briefly define what Inc. 28 is, in case we do have people listen to the podcast, they don't know about it. And I think the topic of some of the challenges of getting involved in this particular permutation of the hobby flow pretty well into talking about Carrion Pass and some of the stuff we did around that. So I think is a good sort of logical progression. That makes sense.
Yeah, because I guess, I think that'll work well. All right, so I'm ready.
Yeah, so I'm just going to do 3, 2, 1, record. We'll click record, then I'll start talking.
Sounds good.
All right, 3, 2, 1, record. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dragged into Turbolasers, a Between the Bolter and Me podcast. This is episode 57. I'm your host, Eric Wire, and I'm here tonight with my brother, Adam Wire.
Hey, everybody.
And I'm excited that we have a special guest tonight. His name is James Ward, also known as Wardsylvania on Instagram, and he is kind of at least somewhat well known in the Inc. 28 community, particularly for sort of masterminding some particular events, particularly one that just actually occurred at Adepticon called Carrion Pass. So we're happy to have him here to talk about that and just the hobby in general.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. You're sort of my kindred hobby spirits.
Yeah.
Turn that realism dial a few notches. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. It's good to be able to talk to you
and find other like-minded hobbyists.
Absolutely.
Yeah, realism isn't always the most easy thing to find in 40K, but it's there at times. It's there at times.
Well, I think if some of the foundational basic stuff, like what a human looks like, how they walk, how a firearm works, if those things match what we know in the real world, it helps with that suspension of disbelief for all the crazy stuff like space wizards and space aliens, right?
Yeah, so, no, it adds some nice context that you can sort of understand it, and
it makes some of the stuff a little more relatable. And because, like, I feel a lot of the realism and stuff, certainly that we sort of strive to, like, achieve and stuff with our models, a lot of it's not really anything, like, too groundbreaking, really. And, like, I feel a lot of it could just slot right into a lot of GW's, like, design philosophy and miniatures in general. And, like, I feel most people wouldn't even bat an eye. They wouldn't even realize it. They just like, oh, this is a new version of whatever, a new bolter or whatever, and they wouldn't think anything of it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, I mean, maybe to kind of start this off, James, could you tell a little bit about like how you kind of got in the hobby, and I guess what sort of aspects of the hobby you're particularly interested? Like, are you still playing Warhammer 40,000 in a general sense, or have you sort of shifted to other elements? And we kind of, anyone who kind of knows you to any degree and has been following some of the Carrion Pass things probably have some sense of the answer to this, but
sure. So I got involved in the Games Workshop hobby back in 2nd edition Warhammer 40,000. So that would have been like late 90s, I think. You know, and like most people, kind of fell in and out of the hobby as I was growing up, and for a lot of years was trying to play 40K, but I loved converting the models, so I'd always have to convert every single model, and I was having this sort of conundrum in my hobby experience where I'd set out to make a 40K army so I could go play 40K, but you know, it'd take me months to convert up a squad, and I'd look at it and go, well, it's going to take me like 5 years to get this army done. This isn't working. And so there was some dissatisfaction there. And it took me quite a few years to realize the problem wasn't that I liked converting models. The problem was that the game system and the rules that I was trying to convert them for wasn't a good fit for how I hobbied. And so making the transition to games like Necromunda, where, you know, you only need 10 or 12 models, and that's a complete you know, warband or gang, you know, that fit much better how I enjoyed the hobby. And so that sort of naturally leads towards you know, the Inc. 28 community, where you know, it's this approach to the hobby that emphasizes narrative, that, you know, involves bespoke miniatures, and tends to have a visual presentation that focuses on the entropy and the more grim, dark elements of the setting. You know, that fit exactly what.
You know, what I feel like Inquisitor 28 or Inc. 28 is sort of, I think like it initially started with the notion of taking Games Workshop's game Inquisitor, which is more of like an RPG type setting, and taking some of the elements of that and merging it with like a skirmish level game like Necromunda. And then instead of being like gang warfare, it's sort of just, you can do whatever you want, explore the Warhammer 40,000 universe. If you want to make a band of like tech priests and stuff that are raiding some like alien planet to get their technology or something, you could do that, whatever. And so I think that's sort of certainly as like hobby as the three of us as hobbyists who like the background and like sort of like converting our own stuff. Inc. 28 was like the perfect fit for that because we could spend as much time as we wanted converting like a handful of models and putting a lot of effort into like their background and custom rules and stuff, and it certainly fits very well with what we loved about the hobby.
Diana, because I think the 54 millimeter game Inquisitor was somewhat of a departure from a lot of Games Workshop's other games, which did have, well, they were never like wildly competitive and super well balanced. This Inquisitor was very much supposed to be closer to a traditional role-playing experience where like winning and such wasn't a major element of it. And it was more about crafting this narrative and whatnot. And I think that was just really taken up by select members of the kind of the community, like, hey, like let's see, merge that with Necromunda and such, and just kind of tell the stories we're interested in telling, convert models we think are cool, and not worry too much about making the most powerful Space Marine possible.
Inquisitor was unique in that it didn't even have a functional points cost system. Like it was literally impossible to, you know, in a vacuum create a list, if you will, or a war band, and then, you know, show up at a store and do a pickup game with somebody and have, you know, those two cohorts be balanced. It required a GM. It was a very unique animal. I can remember the setting really capturing my imagination when it came out back in the early 2000s, but I couldn't find anybody to game with.
Yeah, we never really played it. And I think one of the other things that was important about it, they really spent a lot of time delving into, like, not necessarily a new side of Warhammer 40,000, but it certainly detailed a lot of, like, the elements of, like, the Inquisition and, like, humanity in general in that universe.
Yeah, they added a lot of depth to all the different factions of the Inquisition and kind of made it seem like the wars between different inquisitors and ideology, different sort of ideologies within the Imperium. It made it actually seem like, oh, these actually kind of make sense. It's not just like, oh, good, evil, whatever.
Or like big, dumb action heroes. Like it wasn't really that.
I think that was important.
It was what I think some people have coined domestic 40K. So it was a look into everything that was happening outside the battlefield. And you know, along with Abnett's Eisenhorn trilogy, and that was what really brought the setting alive for me. Because, you know, the focus of Big 40K, you know, which by its very nature as a, you know, a war game that's focused on, you know, squads and tanks and whatnot, is battlefield centric. The Inquisitor setting really, you know, gave it a depth. You know, gave the setting a depth that, you know, hey, there's actually stuff going on besides just battlefields, and you know, and this is where the intrigue happens, and this is where you can find, like, you know, human beings that have been rendered as actual characters with motivation, and whatnot.
So you mentioned kind of about, and it's come up a few times here about how, like, it was hard potentially to, like, you know, neither like my brothers or I or yourself really found a community to play Inquisitor when it first came out, and some of these things, like in the case of like this Inc. 28 movement and such we're talking about, I feel that can also be somewhat difficult as well, or intimidating. Like how do you go about finding a community of people that are interested in this, which is all like a niche part of an already somewhat niche hobby? And like, do you have any sort of comments or thoughts on that, James, about how you started to do this and started to, like, kind of network and communicate with other people who are interested in this sort of Inc. 28 narrative sort of driven, conversion focused sort of flavor or style of this hobby?
There's definitely huge barriers to entry. I know when the
Yeah.
20 community first caught my attention, and you're seeing like Iron Sleet and things they were doing with the Pilgrim and that sort of thing. Just figuring out what it is pretty difficult because there isn't any universally agreed upon definition of what Ink 28
Yeah,
is
yeah,
or Wardsylvania
that's
does. So
true.
even just trying to figure out what it is tough, and then when you think you've got an idea of, okay, this is kind of what's going on and how people are going about this, trying to find an event you can participate in is tough because there aren't very many of them, and they tend to be very
Hmm.
small scale because the nature of these things where you've got a group of people that are investing a lot of time in building narrative and custom models and custom terrain in a lot of cases. These aren't the sort of thing when you find out about them that you feel like you could just invite yourself to, right? And
Yeah.
by the time they're sort of shown publicly, often they're already there's been months of work that's gone into them. They have a fairly established set of participants, and they
And
don't scale.
oftentimes they're just like, oh, we're a group of friends who have been friends for years. Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
And they don't scale to 100 plus participant 40K tournaments. It's pretty
Yeah,
rare to
yeah.
find these events with more than say a dozen people because of the rule sets being used and the amount of bespoke material and assets that are going into them. So yeah, I think it's really hard to figure out how to get involved, and that kind of concerns me because somebody who loves this particular flavor of the hobby, I want to see it grow.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
so
because it's certainly hard. Like, even if you do just come across it, like Iron Sleet or something, and find like some cool models or whatnot, you will, even though like a lot of their events are fairly well documented, but they're like documented over a series of like a year or something, or maybe even more, with all these little posts describing this or that. And it's hard. Like, if you were following it the entire time, you could kind of read them slowly and kind of get this accumulation of like the progression of what's going on and such. But if you come to it after the fact or even just halfway in, there's so much material, none of which that really necessarily summarizes it. It's just, it can be very difficult to know like what's going on. Like, can I be involved with this? In particular, with some of like the invitational sorts of stuff that initially were some of the Iron Sleet stuff they did was literally they did invite people. Then later it was kind of, oh, anyone can be involved. And like all that just sort of could add
Adds to
more
confusion.
confusion to what exactly is going on and how much can one be involved in it.
I feel we were sort of fortunate in that line. We had started like our blog between the Bolter and me and had been blogging about the hobby for pretty regularly for it was about like a year or two. And then that first Iron Sleet Invitational, we were, for some reason, I don't even know how, they asked us to participate in the Invitational. And that very thing is what got like us painting again. Like I had been converting models and stuff, but I hadn't painted anything for probably like 5 years since like I had entered some stuff in like Golden Demon or whatnot. So, and
Mm-hmm.
then based on that, and since we had at least some presence with the blog we had been running for a number of years, it was easier for say us to like start asking around and prod around a little to see if we could take part in certain events and stuff. But if you don't necessarily have that, it's harder. Um, I guess I will say, um, with like the advent of a lot of the social media stuff, it's easier than ever to like start showing like your work and stuff. And I think that can sort of be like a springboard into entering and like starting to participate in like some of the events you like see and hear about.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great entry point. Iron Slate deserves a lot of credit actually in raising the visibility of Ink 28. And
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
second invitational they did, which wasn't actually an invitational because anyone was allowed to participate,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
was the first Ink 28 thing that I actually participated in. So I did up some models for the Thorn Moons
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
invitational. which was a fantastic experience. You know, I really like challenged myself to do things I hadn't done before, like oil paints, and really learned a lot through that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, Iron Sleet needs recognition for, you know, making more people aware, and then providing, you know, opportunity like that for people who maybe don't have those connections in the community to get involved. And that was certainly my entry point.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I
then
think that was a big thing, and really helped like us continue to establish like a growing community, and sort of try and encourage like a collective like area to show people's work, and like
Mm-hmm.
sort of try and inspire one another, and try new things. And there wasn't anything that no one was going to tell you were right or wrong about anything. It was like whatever you wanted to do.
But yeah, I think Adam, what you were saying, I think an important thing, if like you are really interested in kind of being involved in this stuff, like I think the one of the best things to do, like you sort of said, is just start making models, start building stuff that you're interested in, you're excited about, share them on a blog, on Instagram,
Twitter.
whatever. And just because anyone who's also kind of interested in this narrative style stuff, like it's exciting to see other people's work, to see like where their inspirations are from, what kind of crazy, interesting things they're creating. Or even if it's not crazy, if it is like really realistic and tactical stuff, like whatever. And like I feel it's neat to see because everyone kind of has their own vision of 40K that has been built up over time based on what books they've read, what editions they've played, all that sort of stuff. And I think if you are focused and do like those things, like I'm super excited to see other people's takes on things. So like start sharing stuff, and then in general just start commenting on other people's work that you admire. Like eventually I feel like if you comment enough on people's things and actually have sort of insightful comments, like talk about things you like or don't like, I feel eventually they will probably click on your screen name or whatever, like, oh, are you involved in doing stuff? And that can start making connections and such.
definitely. And then I think a next logical progression, this is something you guys have been great about, is even when you can't go attend an event, contributing models to it. You know, so contacting the event organizer and saying, "Hey, I'm interested in contributing models," and you know, it seems like most event organizers are very open to that. And, you know, appreciate that people have that interest and are willing to put in that time and effort to create something for this, you know, scenario or narrative that they've built.
Yeah, no, it's certainly the case. Like because I cannot imagine um, one of these sort of event organizers to be like upset when someone like was so interested in the stuff they're doing that they wanted to like build a few models to fit within that theme. Like I think that's I can't imagine the person not being kind of excited to see like other people excited about the stuff they're doing. And if you're just offering to send a few models, it's not like it's forcing your way into like something that you have to logistically figure out, like, oh, how are we going to fit another person? It's just spreading like the excitement about a project. So like I think that's certainly very worthwhile.
And then,
And for people, if you're trying to get involved in this by doing stuff like that, it kind of is a nice opportunity for you to just sort of, hey, like I always kind of wanted to build this or that, and like let's try to do it. Let's try to use oil paints. Let's try to use these pigments. Let's try some green stuff. Like I'm only making a couple models and see what happens. Like it's a nice way to just experiment with things and have fun and create some things. So I think it's certainly, and yeah, I think the more people see that you are excited about this, trying to contribute to that, it's the more likely that people, start to like be interested in what you have to say or want to involve you in events or just be more excited to like, oh yeah, you made some neat stuff. I recognize that name. And I think that's all important for kind of fostering a community and being a part of it.
It's also a chance to sort of demonstrate reliability or commitment, in that
That's
you're
a
saying,
good
hey,
point.
I'm going to deliver a few models to this project, and if you can do that and send those in on time, so they're there to be an element in this scenario, then people are going to have confidence that if you get involved in one of their later projects, that you're the sort of person that'll follow through and isn't just going to like drop out at the last minute, when you've committed to do something more important, like build the terrain for it or something like that.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, and then that sort of naturally leads into what I think is a good segue into Carrion Pass and the events that have been done at Adepticon the last couple of years. And that if you can't find people that are, if you can't find an event to get involved with, start your own. And so at the same time that Iron Fleet was doing their Thorn Moons Invitational, and I was working on that, I was looking around and I noticed that Adepticon didn't seem to have a whole lot going on in the way of, Inc. 28 or Inquisimunda. There was, it seemed like there were a couple guys that were kind of just meeting up and, a couple friends gaming together. Weirding's Way, I remember seeing some photos of him doing some Inc. 28 stuff there. But there didn't seem to be any sort of like formal organized event. And so I just posted on the Ammo Bunker forum. This was in, sometime in 2017. And I said, hey, is there anybody who'd be interested in organizing an Inc. 28 event at Adepticon 2018? And it's great that we have Johnny in the chat, because he was actually one of the first people to reply, and he's like, that would be amazing, and so it was like, it was great to find a few people that had this passion and enthusiasm. And then once we got a Facebook group going, more people got involved, and people that I never expected, like the idea that Isaac Weirding's Way on Instagram, or Vince, who's Dark Tech, that people like that would get involved in a project I was organizing for the first time, like never crossed my mind. And it was a phenomenal experience. So that became an event called Palatine Spires that was run at Adepticon 2018. And then as soon as that finished up, we started brainstorming and kicking around ideas for the event that would become Carrion Pass, which took place at Adepticon last weekend.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. In particular, like, if you don't want to, like, or don't feel like you have a place that would be good to host an event, like trying to just hold something at like something like Adepticon or various conventions, I think is a good idea. That because people go to these large conventions and such. And so it might be an easier way to start networking with people. Like, hey, is like, people, whoever's going to this, would people be interested in? So you already have like a group of people that are sort of set aside time that they were going to be at this convention. So I think that's a good way to at least have a little bit of structure to something if you haven't done something like this before.
Hey,
My
actually,
thought process was that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it looks like Greg has joined us.
Yeah, I'm here. Greg's
Greg.
in the proverbial house.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg.
Good evening, everybody. Hey, James. Hi, Johnny in the chats. Yeah.
Do you want to start Audacity, Greg? Because I mean, some
did.
of this you did. Okay, because this can all be edited out if needed.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right. Sorry to interrupt, James.
Well, my thought process was, Adepticon is, of all the events that take place in America, if there's any event where there'd be enough hobbyists to find a group to do an Inc. 28 event, it'd be Adepticon. So that was
like, I feel Adepticon is like the miniature convention in the world.
It's the biggest one in the U.S. Yeah. I don't know about the world. I mean, England's got a much higher density of hobbyists, than we do.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel it has to be up there.
What's the big convention in the UK? Does anyone know?
Idea.
Salute's one.
Yeah, that is one of them.
Also, big convention things in the United States. Gen Con is a big thing. I guess Gen Con is more
all
like
games,
just gaming
board
in
games,
general, like
yeah.
lots of board games and stuff, and card game tournaments and such.
There's also Nova over in DC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right in my backyard practically. I've been meaning to go, and it hasn't happened yet.
So if there's a would-be Inc. 28 event organizer out there who's like, where would be a good place for me to try to host an Inc. 28 event? I don't think anybody's doing that sort of thing at Nova, and there's a lot of hobbyists there. So
there are, like all three of us were close. Like that would be very
try
easy.
And participate. So that's one of the things that I'm upset that I wasn't able to find time to send some models to your event, Carrion Pass. And so I guess with that, maybe we could sort of start asking you some questions about the game this year and sort of like what the theme was and some of that. So
what was the setting, and is it, from what I gather, is it true that it was set on Necromunda? It's not just using a modification of Necromunda's rules. It's literally on Necromunda.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. You can chalk that up to my lack of creativity, I guess.
I mean,
I think that's kind of cool.
We had, so I guess this would have been April of 2018, so like literally a day or two after Adepticon 2018 ended, we spun up a Facebook group and we started brainstorming ideas. And I think actually the night Adepticon ended, Vince, Dark Tech on Instagram, he said, I want to do something that involves like walking shanty towns or walking platforms, sort of like Howl's Moving Castle, I think was the way it was described.
That's cool.
And so I was thinking about, okay, well, how would I incorporate something like that into a scenario? And then I saw Rossum Secundus, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
And I read the codex they'd produced for that, and the vehicles that were built for that event were just awesome, and that was around the same time that I think we were seeing trailers for Mortal Engines. So that gave me this idea of, it'd be really cool to do something with big vehicles. And eventually, I don't remember how, but the idea came to me to do sort of an Old West train heist, set in 40K. And so I kind of proposed that idea to the Facebook group, and everybody seemed really excited about it. So that's what we started working on. So we had a sort of a scenario before we actually had a setting, really. And then there was a conversation about, well, where do we set this? Do we create a setting? Do we put it in Necromunda? Do we have a set on Tor Megiddo? And ultimately we ended up choosing Necromunda. And it's interesting if you look at the map that Games Workshop created for Necromunda. And this was entirely coincidence. After I'd written about the Carrion Pass being this, it's sort of this detour, if you will, right before a caravan that's crossing the Great Ash Road reaches Hive Acropolis. It's sort of this shortcut. So if you can't take the normal route, maybe you're short on fuel, or you have this aggressive timetable, or you're just desperate or crazy, you can take this shortcut through this this dangerous pass called the Carrion Pass. And it turns out that on that map, if you look at the lines for the Great Ash Road, it sort of curves south and comes around and comes up toward the Acropolis Hive from the south. And then there's this other line that goes straight from that sort of curve straight to the Hive Acropolis. And so it just worked out perfectly that
That's
like
great.
the sort of setting we created matched up with this map that GW created who knows how long ago.
Yeah, that's neat. I feel it's always cool how little things sort of align like that. Actually, it looks like Vince might be in the chat here. There's Dark Tech here. Nice to have you. Cough, cough. Next event at Nova. Yeah, I mean, it certainly could happen.
I think I hear Dark Tech volunteering to organize that.
Yeah, I mean, he's already done the Mare Solarum stuff, so he's a natural at it, right? Old hat.
He's a veteran at this point.
Yeah, but so that's neat. with that in mind, then with sort of the idea in place, did you come up with, knowing that it was going to be on Necromunda, did that sort of set like, yeah, let's just use the Necromunda rule set and like modify it? Like how quickly did you sort of try to incorporate rules into this concept? Because I know that's sort of a sticking point with a lot of people trying to get into the Inc. 28 thing. They're like, I'm not sure what this even is. Like, are there rules? What are the rules? And some people play these sorts of events very rule light. Others will kind of incorporate more. Like for the events that you've held, like kind of what place do the rules sort of sit in them, and how did it kind of affect Carrion Pass?
I feel like maybe I'm too close to it to have an objective view on that. I'm always worried that I've gone too rules heavy. We'd used it was brand new at that time, in Necromunda 17 rules for Palatine Spires, and for the sort of size event we were running, it seemed to work really well. It was that, in my mind, perfect balance between rule complexity or crunch and the ability to get enough turns done with half a dozen people that you can actually finish the game. And so I had in mind, I think, using Necromunda from the get-go. The setting actually came quite a bit later in the process. Once we had a scenario idea in mind, my brain immediately starts going to game mechanics, and so I started doing a series of posts, just on different mechanics I had in mind. And the idea, the thing that sort of made the scenario unique relative to regular Necromunda is that rather than the board being a fixed location that models move around on, it would represent this. The area around this cargo rig as it's racing down this pass. And so the terrain actually would move down the board, rather than being in fixed locations, and all the other vehicles and whatnot would move relative to what the cargo rig was doing.
Yeah, that's a cool thought.
And so it turns out that that's as we were talking about earlier, that's similar to a Gorka Morka scenario that people apparently have fond memories of. So it seemed like we were headed in the right direction, pun intended. And so we had rules, we had game mechanics, and then the sort of building the narrative or the story around it came later, and which. There's no correct way to go about this, right? Some things start with the story, or they start with the setting, or they start with the models, or they start with some sort of game mechanic where you're like, hey, I think this would make a cool scenario. And it doesn't matter what order those things come in, it's really the end result that matters. So in our case, it was rules first, and then...
And I feel from the little that I've kind of glanced through some of the rules and stuff you created, I feel that strong sort of maybe not necessarily setting, but the strong theme of this like war rig cargo hauler, like going down this pass and all these vehicles kind of swerving around trying to intercept it and all these things, like that is a very strong kind of theme that people can work on and design stuff for. So like even if it's not super focused on exactly mechanically how that's working, it's still enough to kind of get people like excited about something that they could try to create, which I think is important.
For the vehicle, the reason the game ended up with so many custom rules is because we were adding vehicles and we were adding this unique mechanism for movement. And I think it achieved a good combination of things in that we decided to use simultaneous movement, so people would pick how each of their vehicles were going to move in secret, and then everybody would reveal what they'd chosen for vehicle movement. So they have like 2 minutes, they'd be on a timer, so you couldn't spend forever kind of trying to figure that out. And so much like real driving, you'd have to anticipate how you thought the other vehicles were going to move, because you didn't know what they were going to do when you were choosing how you were going to move. And that created a lot of I think a healthy tension, and up the drama, and resulted in more collisions, of course, which was highly entertaining. But it also had the benefit of speeding things up, because instead of one person moving and then the next person moving,
that's a good way to kind of combine many aspects together, which when I was kind of reading through those rules, the rules you briefly described there, and it made like, have you played Fantasy Flight Games X-Wing or
Nope.
any of those games?
No.
So that's sort of what you do in that
was,
as well. You, like, each of the ships have, like, their own style of movement and stuff, and you have these little dials where you choose how you're going to move in secret, and then you start revealing those in a particular order based on, like, pilot skill. And then, so yeah, there's a lot of elements of you sort of trying to predict where you think your opponent's going to go and how you could best...
Yeah, because it's when reading it, it reminded me of those sorts of mechanics right away. And I guess there's another sort of Mad Max sort of themed game called Gaslands that also has kind of sort of a maneuver mechanic. It's a little different, but still kind of in that vein. But so it sounds that these things sort of came about independently of that, but a good idea is a good idea, right?
Yeah, if I can come up with an idea that seems like it, creates for entertaining moments and makes gameplay more efficient, that's a rare
strong
win.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm definitely, this is a good game mechanic if it can simultaneously achieve both of those goals. We made some other modifications, so like instead of alternating activations for the players for their fighters, we had in priority order, player 1 would activate all of their fighters, and then player 2 would go and activate all of theirs, and so on, to speed up the sort of normal.
Yeah. I feel Necromunda, the addition of activating back and forth was a good addition to make like just kind of games like 1 versus 1. It makes them more engaging. But whenever doing these sorts of larger events, like you kind of have to take some liberties to like just make the game engaging and relatively quick. And I think, like you're saying, this movement mechanic seems really a great way of streamlining and speeding stuff up while kind of adding additional tension. So like that's perfect. Vince here, or Dark Tech here, said that probably his favorite part of the whole event was the movement mechanics. And see, I think this good call.
And apparently on one of the days, they actually used some of the like X-Wing movement dials for some of the different vehicles to like play around with the movement. That actually I think would work pretty well. Because like now they have tons of different ships and stuff, and you could probably kind of choose one that you think would work well with whatever vehicle or plane you had. That's fun.
Yeah, because each has like certain ones are more maneuverable and can like make sharper turns or go further and whatnot, and all of that could potentially fit in with sort of car racing and stuff. So that is an interesting thought, and something that I feel fits nicely in general with Inc. 28, that you can kind of take different rule sets from even different games and sort of merge them in creative ways to try to
do your own thing.
Yes, I think that's neat.
Well, so hear me out, guys. What if we, for the event at Nova, what if we tried to take the worker placement elements of Agricola?
That sounds terrible, Greg.
Yeah, maybe some things aren't meant to be combined.
Yeah, no one wants that, Greg.
Worker placement, no.
Or deck building, let's put some deck building elements in there.
We didn't have deck building elements, but we did actually use the Grim Dark cards to determine priority for activating fighters.
That's nice.
To enjoy.
That's nice.
Eliminates all the dice rolling.
And
then we had the
all
Joker
GW games have tons of dice.
So whoever got the Joker got to choose where they were in the turn in the activation sequence. So
okay,
that's a good idea. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things we took part, like the Pilgrim and the Curse of the Alabaster thing, that sort of, a lot of them, they had like custom made like cards and tokens and stuff to kind of play in with that like the games and also kind of add like another neat visual flair to the event.
So on that note, briefly, as you were scrolling through the pictures, you probably saw the custom tokens that were created for the event.
Let me try and find them.
A shout out to Isaac, who's Weirding's Way, who is
there we go.
A master of typography, and so he put those together, and they came out beautifully. It really captured the theme of the event. And so we used those for the vehicle movement. Those are the things that people would select and put face down to choose their movement in secret, and then some tokens to record damage states for vehicles. So it kind of highlights that these events are the combination of a lot of people's different skill sets being brought together, and the event ultimately ends up being so much better than any one of us could have produced on our own, because of the diversity of skills that the group of participants brings. So that might be a good segue into kind of back to the topic we're talking about, of the difficulty of getting involved. You know, when you started brainstorming this, I pulled in the people who participated in Palatine Spire. So we already had 6 or 8 people, and once we decided on an event, of course everybody wanted to participate. So straight away the event was full, like before it had ever been discussed publicly, outside of our group.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's a testament that the previous event was fun if everybody wants to come back. But I kind of felt that if that was what the events were going to become, where every year it was the same 6 or 8 people, and other people never had a chance to come in and get involved for the first time, that wasn't really fully fulfilling what I wanted to see from the events. So we decided to run the game twice, once on Saturday and once on Sunday, which doubled the number of people we could have involved.
That's a
based
good idea.
On how Palatine Spires went, we knew that given the rule set we were using and sort of the format, 6 people was about the max we could have in any one game and still get it done in time.
Yeah.
So we made it 2 sessions, and that allowed us to bring in another half dozen people. And so we had a number of people who built war bands and participated in the event for the first time, which was awesome. And then we also had some people who contributed NPCs, doing something along the lines of what you guys have often done. And that was fantastic because I hadn't had time to build a crew for the cargo rig. And so I was planning to use my Necromunda gang, but they weren't really, they weren't built for the scenario. And so we had people contribute 3 different sets of NPCs, a group of sort of cargo rig guardians, a group of, actually, you can see a couple of them in the pictures there, a group that sort of lived inside the cargo rig and maintained its engines, kind of a machine cult group, some outriders, and then one person contributed this enormous pass guardian to be kind of the final, sort of the climax of the scenario. That's one set there, which contributed by Jason Turner Minis.
Yeah, they're cool.
Which incidentally were voted Player's Choice for the NPCs. And so ultimately we were able to get 16 people involved in this thing, in terms of 17 people in terms of contributing
that's
models.
Nice. That's a large number of people.
Yeah, and so I really wanted to make those opportunities available for people who maybe they'd heard of it and they didn't have an established group, and they had an opportunity to get involved previously to get in there and contribute to the event. So we'd stated explicitly, hey, if you want to contribute NPCs, contact us. And
yeah, now that's good. It's nice to be that you were pretty explicit about it right up front to like eliminate some of those questions and that sort of thing. Then I guess sort of talking about sort of all these NPCs and things like that, you functioned as like sort of the game master in this. Did you have a warband yourself, or were you specifically the game master kind of controlling this war rig and that sort of thing? How did that
for day one, I ran the war rig, the past guardian, and then the NPCs that were defending the cargo rig. And then for day two, we had somebody who was there who helped out running the NPCs, which was also really nice because it's a fair amount of work just to run the scenario. So having that extra set of hands and somebody to do those tasks is good. And then when the defenders of the cargo rig totally crush one of the war bands, I'm not the one doing it as the GM, right? So that's always a plus.
Yeah. So what led you to, like, for the previous event? Had you also like GM'd it, and did you have a war band for that? Or, like, what sort of led you to decide to have this like sort of a fixed GM for the event? Because not all of these sorts of Inc. 28s necessarily have that. And was that like important to you to like ensure that the narrative kind of stayed on tracks, or what sort of led to the decision to use that?
So I think the GM role is important in this sort of scenario for two reasons. One is when you're using a custom rule set that nobody's used before, you do need some sort of final arbitrator to say, hey, the rules work this way, right?
Yeah.
And if that's somebody who's ideally, if that's somebody who's not playing one of the warbands, then they're a little more sort of impartial or removed from that. So it's not, the guy next to you who's rammed into you and it's like, well, I want the rule to work this way because I just.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And then the second thing is, if you're going to have any sort of narrative events occur, particularly if they're going to be a surprise to the participants, you need a GM there to execute those narrative events that occur. And so we had a tiny bit of that in Palatine Spires, and then we had a tiny bit of that in Carrion Pass.
Okay, well that's cool. And are you happy with that? And is that something, if you would hold an event in the future or anything, would that be something you'd want to continue to implement?
I think it depends entirely on the scenario and the
format. Okay.
I don't think there's a one size fits all, and so if it makes sense for the event, then absolutely do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I feel it goes back to this whole thing about Inc. 28 as a whole. Like, it's very sort of free form to what you're excited about or what you want to try to accomplish. There aren't like set rules. Sure, there might be some guidelines to help get you started with things, but there aren't like these set rules of what you have to do or should do.
So maybe we could talk briefly about some of the things that didn't go right.
So
that's useful in terms of like that's where your lessons learned come from, right? So we didn't have the chance to play test this or balance it ahead of time, and so going into it, one of my big concerns was that I didn't want a situation where a player could have one bad die roll, and because you've got this vehicle that's transporting all of their characters, that like one bad roll on a vehicle damage table results in them losing all of their models on turn one. That would just be a super crappy experience, right? I set out very intentionally to make the vehicles durable so that couldn't happen. But in the process of doing that, I made the vehicles virtually indestructible. So in the Saturday game, we didn't have a single vehicle get destroyed. And so I'd gotten the balance wrong.
Okay.
And it was, I think that was fairly easy to identify, toward the end of the game, like, hey, there hasn't been, like, there should have been some vehicles that got blown up. Like, we didn't intend for them to be indestructible, and it was creating problems with some of the narrative events. Like at the end of the scenario, this past guardian shows up, and that's supposed to be the player's clue that it's time to, get out while the getting's good with whatever loot they've managed to grab. But the past guardian shows up, charges a small vehicle, and then spends 2 turns clubbing it because he literally can't destroy this thing. And I statted the past guardian to be ridiculously OP. So that was rather anticlimactic, right? So then for Sunday's game, we made some modifications, simplified the vehicle damage table, made sure that you still couldn't have a vehicle go out on a single bad die roll, but they were much less durable than they had been in the Saturday game.
Okay.
And so I think that was successful. And
Were vehicles destroyed?
We ran out of time on Sunday, unfortunately, because Adepticon doesn't stay open, till midnight on Sunday like it does the other days. So we sort of ran out of time, unfortunately. We did have vehicles take a lot more damage in that game.
Okay, well, that's good.
And when those things happen, and the balance isn't quite right or something, as the person who wrote the rules, I feel like I've kind of let people down. But it seemed like people had fun regardless. But that sort of thing's going to happen.
Vince says that somehow all of his vehicles ended up on fire.
So Vince played the Sunday game when the vehicles were a lot more fragile, and he ended up kind of in the middle of a whole bunch of people, so he was colliding with things right and left. And
that sounds great.
So
yeah,
that makes for some entertaining moments, for sure.
Well, I feel that also sort of speaks to the point that, like, even if it's going to always be hard to sort of do some of those balancing things, particularly if it's modifying the rule set with all these different people, different war bands. Like, that's always going to be kind of a thing that won't be perfect. But I think in general, people who are coming to these are all more for the experience and the excitement of helping tell this sort of collaborative story that it doesn't matter as much. It's not like you flew out there and spent all this money because you want to bash faces in at some competitive tournament. So, like, I don't think it's something that one should feel too bad about. Like, the rules weren't perfect. Like, the rules were always sort of just a vehicle for pushing this story along and having a good time. So,
yeah, it sounds like you accomplished it.
We also had some challenge with the deployment where I'd let people deploy wherever, but if you had a bigger, slower vehicle, we had a couple players, and I think this happened to Johnny, who deployed in a corner, and so they couldn't actually ever get to the cargo rig to try to steal cargo because there were a whole bunch of other vehicles between them and the cargo rig. And so in hindsight, it would have made sense for me to be a little more restrictive about where I let people deploy. So there's, regardless of how much time you spend on the rule set, if it's something brand new, even if it's fairly simple, there's going to be balance issues. There's going to be mistakes.
Yeah, but it sounds like it was a blast. And lots of pictures have kind of shown up throughout kind of that time on Instagram and all that stuff. It's just been a kind of delight to see all the crazy vehicles and all that sort of stuff. I guess that brings me to a question, like, would you talk a little bit about how you built the cargo rig and what led you to kind of use scale, like tank models, for actually constructing it? Was that a new thing for you? And kind of what possessed you to do that? And was it something you'd want to continue to do with building models for 40K or otherwise?
So when I was a kid, my dad actually worked for a hobby distributor, and one of the sorts of products that he sold to hobby stores was plastic model kits, things like military tank models and such. So I'd grown up around that sort of thing, but using it for the 40K hobby prior to this, I had never done that. But as I was thinking about how I wanted the rig to be built, I thought, well, I need a really big tank chassis. And the Bane blade wasn't quite the size I needed, so I started looking around, and it turns out that people make 1/16 scale historical tank models.
Oh yeah, they do.
Which are huge. You can kind of see in that picture you've got up right now. This thing, it's like 15 inches long, and I think it ended up being about 14 inches high. This is a monster. And my original plan was to have the cargo rig built on 2 of these 1/16 scale Russian T-34 tank chassis. As the project went on, so after I got the kits and started building them, it became clear that a vehicle that was built that way simply wouldn't work. Because it would go over a small bump and it would just break in the middle because of how large it was. So it became then one of these tank chassis plus a trailer, and then as time went further on and things became more time constrained, it became just one chassis.
I mean, it's gigantic the way it is. I feel like it does the job.
Things were very crowded. on the cargo rig. So it would have benefited from being a little bigger from a gameplay standpoint, but it also would have been much harder to actually get to Adepticon if I had made it as
I was going to say, it was probably would be a nightmare to transport.
It was already a challenge.
Yeah.
I suppose we hit the sweet spot. But to answer your question, no. So this was my first time using a historical model like that for 40K, and it gave me a new appreciation for other companies' vehicle kits, because this this 1/16 scale tank kit I think was like $120. So that's the price of maybe an Imperial Knight for 40K. And whereas the Knight comes with maybe 3 sprues and I don't know 200 components or less, this thing came with dozens of sprues and thousands of components.
Like all just the
200 200 tank tread pieces.
The
not just 200. That's 200 per. Well, I guess you're right. It's probably like.
Why did you choose a T-34?
I liked the shape and the look of the treads. That was really all it came down to.
They're cool.
T-34s are cool.
But since I'd only used the bottom half of the chassis and it came with a completely detailed interior, I now have all of these really cool bits to do future conversions with. And so in terms of value for money, if things like the amount of parts you get for doing conversions matter to you as a hobbyist, these historical tank kits are a crazy good value.
Yeah, I mean, if you want one of the drive wheels to have 30 pieces in it, like, have at it. Get those dragon tank kits.
There's a trade-off for sure.
Yeah, there is a trade-off. Did this one have any photo etch with it? Like the brass pieces and stuff?
I think it came with a little bit. I didn't end up using any of it because it was all on the top, the part I didn't use.
Yeah.
Or the interior, I don't remember which.
Yeah, nah, scale models. It's like I only recently started to do some building of them, and it was actually for the Thornmoon stuff. I built the one tank and whatnot, and they're just in the tracks, just in the tracks for that tiny little 1/35th scale T-26 had like over 1,000 pieces just in the tracks.
Wow. No, this one wasn't that bad, but it still took a long time to build.
Yeah, so they're a much different sort of thing to tackle.
I mean, there's a reason Games Workshop makes their tanks the way they do. They want them to be able to be assembled in a much shorter time frame, particularly if they're trying to encourage newer hobbyists and stuff to get into it. And if they want to play like Warhammer 40,000, they probably need a whole bunch of them. And
it's true.
If they had to assemble one of these like historical model kits, if it was more like that, they would probably start and then just give up.
I remember people complaining about the Van Sar kits when they came out for Necromunda because the Ganger, has more than 6 pieces that it's made from.
Yeah.
Like, oh, they were so hard to assemble, and I'm like, no, they really weren't.
They were actually pretty good.
They were great. I loved them. But you're absolutely right. And since the business model is perpetuated on getting people to be able to build and paint things as quickly and efficiently as possible so they can buy more things to build and paint, that cycle definitely, they want to make that as fast and efficient as they can. And that means not having 2,000 part kits.
Yeah, and in some sense, in a lot of cases, particularly with like a fictitious tank, like,
it doesn't
there's
matter.
no one that can go in and say like, oh, well, there should have actually been like 113 treads on that side, not whatever, and like those rivets aren't right. Like, so like it doesn't matter. They can make the tracks like single piece sort of things, and no one can really complain about it too much. Whereas some of the historical tanks, it's easier to be like, oh, well, that isn't quite historically accurate.
It's also about knowing your customer. Historical tank kits are going to appeal to at least a significant segment of them. They're going for maximum realism. They found some specific tank from World War II, and they're trying to recreate that in 1/35th scale.
Yeah.
And down to things like you're talking about the weld lines and the rivets and all of that. So if that's your target market, then you really do need to invest that extra money in more parts to get as precise as possible with the dimensions and the the visuals and everything.
Nah, yes, that's true. Well, I guess we've been talking for a little while here. Like maybe we want to start to wrap this up a little bit. I guess maybe a last sort of series of questions here, like having just run the Carrion Pass event, where like what were some of like your favorite and best elements from it, and is there anything that you would do differently? I mean, I guess you kind of touched on maybe adjust the rules for vehicles a little bit, which you sort of did, but like are there any things that stood out as like particularly great, or what you'd want to do differently?
That is a good question. So one of the things I would have done differently is not run the final game on Sunday. I would have run it some other day of the con, just so we'd have a full day.
Okay.
Finished it out. And based on the experience from the year before, knowing that Sunday's a short day, I should have thought of that and made that call as the person sort of organizing it. So live and learn, right? In terms of what went really well, for me, kind of the highlight of these events is always just getting to talk to fellow hobbyists in person. People that I collaborate with online all year, but I only see them once a year at Adepticon, and so just talking hobby with other people that have a similar passion and interest, and getting to see all of these amazing models people have built in person. That's to me more rewarding than the actual game itself. And so for me, that was the highlight, and just the amount of skill and creativity and effort that everyone put into the project. Getting to see those cohorts on the tabletop was just fantastic.
Well, while the games were running, did lots of people like come up to kind of see what was going on and ask about some of that stuff?
Yeah, we actually we had requested from the Adepticon team, who are amazing, by the way. That's the most well-organized event I've ever encountered.
That's good.
We'd asked them if we could be in the main hall, because we thought that's where the most people would see it, and we wanted to raise visibility for Inc. 28. And so, we had a lot of people come by, and I think more people than the previous year knew what it was, at least. When we said, hey, this is Inc. 28 or Inquisimunda or something about Blanchitsu, there was more recognition of it than or awareness than the previous year. So I think the combination of social media, things like Instagram, and then of course the Blanchitsu series that used to run in White Dwarf, I think those have definitely made a much greater segment of the
I think I saw in one of the pictures on Instagram, I think I maybe saw Dave Taylor there talking. Was Dave Taylor there?
He came around both days, and he seemed pretty enthusiastic about it, and actually expressed interest in maybe getting involved in a future event. So
that's nice.
He actually go ahead.
Yeah, he actually is in Baltimore. He's really close to me.
He just put out a big hardback book on building armies. And for anybody that doesn't know, he's been in the scene for a long time and has built some of the really iconic armies, converted armies over the years. Long before we had kits like Sisters of Silence or Custodians, that sort of thing. Like, he had been kit bashing some of that stuff together. So, one of the pioneers in a way. So if somebody's looking for a book that has really cool converted armies,
well, doesn't he have another Kickstarter now about like terrain making that maybe is still running as we speak?
He did mention there's either something coming or something that was already running. But I guess he's planning to do a book, and I may get the description wrong, but I think it's sort of like terrain building fundamentals for people who want to learn how to do terrain but don't have experience doing that, or just want to sort of flesh out or improve their terrain building. And he's collaborating with somebody else on it. I've forgotten who they are, but apparently they're a very famous terrain maker.
Yeah, so it's 10 days left to go, people. The book's called Terrain Essentials. And I guess it's written by Mel Bowes, is perhaps the gentleman's name. Yeah, Mel. Yeah, so it's something to look into, because he has James, you said there, Dave Taylor's been involved in the hobby for a long time. Like, I'm pretty sure he used to work at the old battle bunker when it was in Glen Burnie in Maryland, and was kind of worked with Games Workshop for a while. And some of his initial armies were kind of done at that time, but he still sort of stayed involved in the hobby and has done all sorts of cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Johnny says, meld the terrain tutor.
Okay. That's cool.
I don't know about Mel, but I don't build terrain, and I guess I don't play games.
Well, maybe that's something you could start making terrain, Greg.
I'll
Actually-
have to back this book.
Actually, maybe that's one last thing I'd be interested in. Like, did you make a bunch of terrain for the event then, or?
I made a few terrain pieces. The mechanics of the scenario dictated what the terrain would be, because we needed pieces that could move down the board that would complicate the movement of the vehicles but didn't completely block the table.
Yeah.
And so what we ended up with, you might see pictures of them in some of the stuff that's been posted online, like in the background. But basically, they're just really simple. They're just layers of cork on a plastic card, painted up as rock formations, and then a few little those little tufts that you can get. Like grass I painted them purple to make them look like some sort of, alien fauna or whatever, and give some color contrast to these very boring, sort of tan colored rocks. So
Looks
nothing
good.
fancy or complicated there. Shout outs to Dark Tech for giving me the teaching me how to do corkboard rock formations properly, because my first attempt was pretty embarrassing.
Well, everything's a learning process, right?
Yeah,
Everything's a learning process.
getting plugged in with a group of hobbyists that share these interests definitely accelerates learning in terms of hobby techniques and skills. Just chatting with you guys, for example, when you're doing the Twitch streams, I learned about all kinds of different things I didn't know existed that, would make a particular aspect of the hobby easier or better, or a certain technique you figured out. So the more people that you have around you like that,
Everyone kind of comes with different expertise or perspectives. That all helps a lot. So
for sure.
Matt, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, like Johnny here said. That's true. You can learn a lot now that wasn't really easily available not even all that long ago.
Like, believe it or not, when we started building models when we were like 12, we didn't know that you were supposed to thin your paint. We didn't have videos of Duncan Rhodes telling us to thin our paints. But we were 12. We were dumb.
We figured it out eventually. You needed to do that. Oh, apparently, so Dark Tech said some of what we were looking at here were some of the ash board was created by Rob from Ex Profundis, so he's another big name in the Inc. 28 community.
Did Rob, was he there? Rob Mead, is that perhaps his last name?
Yep,
I'm pretty sure he was there. Yeah.
So there's
cool.
In the pics you probably see. So the thing that was run on the sort of flat ash waste mat, that was the Carrion Pass event. Which Rob participated in on Sunday. And then on Saturday, Rob and Isaac and Vince and I think a couple other people were running a separate game next to it, which is the 3D terrain you see. Like in that picture you've got up right now, using a lot of the vehicles from the Carrion that they built for the Carrion Pass event. And shout outs to Rob, that's one of the best boards I've ever seen, and it's enormous. It's like 12 feet long. He created some amazing terrain. So, and then there were some other neat things, like in the background of that picture, you can see the vehicle or the crashed spaceship from
Curse of the Alabaster.
Yes, thank you. And then also, I think Isaac had his whale from.
That's good.
The
Solum.
Solum. So it was great to get to see those in person.
Yeah, that's nice. So I mean, it sounds like it was a great event, a few really cool games, and just a nice opportunity to meet a bunch of people and reconnect with people, like everything that makes the hobby great.
Is anybody writing like a report of some of the stuff that happened, or a story pertaining to what happened, or something like that?
I won't publicly commit anybody to doing that.
Yeah.
There's been discussion about it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Because that would be neat to see, like, but it is, it is a large undertaking, and particularly with so many people involved and so many things, like it's hard to necessarily keep track of all the things that are going on, so it's always kind of inherently difficult. But
yeah,
definitely, I think the desire was expressed to have like recorded it or streamed it potentially, because then you'd be able to go back and kind of do a write-up based on what was actually happening. I know that Johnny took pretty extensive notes of the game on Saturday, so yeah,
that's cool.
Someone may go back and write.
Johnny, does that mean you're going to write about it?
Yeah. I am not committing Johnny to doing
that. Well, so you know what? Something probably could happen. This could be a plug for the 28 online magazine. I bet you could probably compile something about like these games for like the next issue.
There's been discussion of that as well.
Yeah, there's already it has to happen
because I think
it's the perfect place to display and promote some of that stuff.
Yeah, promote like getting involved and like participating in events and stuff.
Yeah, so anybody listening to the podcast that hasn't checked out 28 Mag, it's basically 140 pages of Inc. 28 type content. It's very well done. 28-mag.com I think is the website. Totally free, and I think of it as what White Dwarf could be.
Yeah.
Or what White Dwarf should be.
It's true.
But never will.
Never will. Yeah,
it's a magazine I would pay to subscribe to. I'll put
it's true. It's true. And actually be excited to receive.
I would be surprised if issue 2 of 28 Mag doesn't have some sort of content in it related to Carrion Pass.
Yeah, I would be surprised too. All right, well, maybe we should wrap up this episode of the podcast. But it was really nice having you here to talk about the event and sort of hear a little bit about how you got involved with Inquisitor 28 and running some of these events and some advice and for people to try to start doing that sort of thing. I guess with that, any last words, things you'd like to say?
Well, a big thank you to everybody that contributed to the Carrion Pass event. It's ultimately it's successful because there's a group of people that come together and invest their creativity and their time and their effort into it. So I appreciate them greatly. It would not exist without all of them. So I guess you can find me on Instagram at Wardsylvania if you want to see more pictures of the Carrion Pass event, or just follow hashtag Carrion Pass and you'll see the photos that everybody who is involved has been posting.
Yeah, they're worth looking at. Lots of cool stuff.
Yeah, well, it was really nice having you, and it would be great to have you on again on the podcast at some point, talking about whatever, another event, just musing about the hobby.
If you want to complain about new model releases, we're always doing that.
Yeah.
You're always welcome. If you have strong emotions about anything.
Your critiques are you're more experienced and skilled at critiquing the model proportions than I am. I don't know how much I would contribute to that, but I would love to be back on the podcast at some point in the future.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, well, thank you, and everybody, thanks for listening. And yeah, I guess follow the blog and our Instagram account and all that stuff. But ultimately, we'll talk to you again soon.
Over and out.
All right, yeah. So we can stop recording that then.
Awesome.
All right. So when we can save this stuff, but we can still keep talking a little bit here. But it's nice that some people are actually on the stream. I mean, I guess it's for all these sorts of Twitch streams, it's kind of hard because
Yeah.
it's, you know, this is sort of a niche hobby, and people that are involved in it are kind of all over the place and not just restricted to one time zone.
Yeah, it's about like the early morning over in England, I think.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's
6 a.m. or 5 something a.m.
Yeah, so it can be kind of hard.
Like for the most part, everybody has a job, and so I mean here, like these streams, like we hold them at like 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the United States. So I mean it's a time. It's not necessarily great, but
right, it's like 1 a.m. over there, right? So
yeah, it's almost 1 a.m. here, and like we do have to go to work tomorrow. Cool. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you guys have started streaming on Twitch, because there's that opportunity to interact through chat, and it's been great, you know, just talking with you guys as you're, you know, discussing the models and everything.
Yeah, well, that was sort of the thought. Like, you know, we podcast for a little while as a way to kind of interact with other people and such, and we realized, you know, like it wouldn't be that much harder to just while we're recording these things have it on Twitch, just to give, you know, another opportunity for people to sort of interact, and it seems it's just a fun way to continue to interact with the community, because I feel that is, as you sort of alluded to as well, is kind of one of the best parts about the hobby. And like if it was just us like building the models by ourselves and putting them in cases and whatever, and never interacting with other people, it would, like, we would have probably stopped. But like to be able to be a part of the community and talk with other people and share things and get excited about stuff like that makes everything all the more exciting.
Certainly. Yeah. And I feel like one of my favorite things is actually just like making models for other events and just sending them away to like get other people excited about stuff and kind of show that you're kind of paying attention and you're interested in stuff. So, but then again, all that takes time, and I don't have enough time to do all the stuff that I want to do, unfortunately.
Well, we'll be sure to loop you in to the next thing, whatever it turns out to be. And
yeah, I'll certainly. I want to take part and make some models for whatever the next thing is, whether it's at Nova, Adepticon, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, both of those things we should start going to.
We really should.
Well, now that Vince is publicly committed to doing
right?
Event, right? That's
Thanks, Vince.
Go.
We're excited about it.
What kind of models he needs.
That's true.
No pressure.
But a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, maybe just a little.
Well, I should probably let you guys get some sleep then.
Yeah, I suppose maybe that would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I don't know, kind of about the audio stuff. If you can just export it as a MP3 file,
sure, yeah, I can do that.
You should be able to do that one way or another through Audacity, and then either if you could email it or share it via Google Drive or Dropbox or something.
Okay, yep, I will get that over to you guys.
All right.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. It was nice to see some people in the chat, and certainly you're always welcome to any of the streams we do. Like, currently we still don't stream a ton, but for the most part, every Tuesday at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the United States, we've been streaming then for probably like the past few months, really. So it's at least then, and then I've been also trying to do a little more streaming, talking about some of my hobby progress and like what I'm working on. Still sort of working out some of the kinks and how to like record that well, but regardless, look out for some of that too.
Yeah, but it would be cool for all of us to like, get together and just do some sort of event in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Nova.
Right.
I don't even know when that even happens.
It's about
What,
6 months
Nova?
away.
6 weeks away.
August, September time. No, 6 months. It's
Yeah,
I think it's August, September time frame.
Okay.
Oh, it's good to hear. It was fun. And yeah, like, lots of time, start thinking of new ideas and stuff. Like, once I'm done with all the Mordheim stuff I'm working on, I should have a lot more time to focus on other things.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll be back. Keep on enjoying the hobby, doing whatever you want with it. The more the merrier. Till next time.
Yep. See you, everybody.
See ya.